you. Oh, sit down.
Governor, thank you so much for joining Prologue. We, a couple of weeks ago, had Olympia Dukakis in town, so you're following in good footsteps.
Oh my gosh.
I know, right?
I wish you hadn't told me that.
No pressure. We're talking about art today, obviously, but there's a lot on the minds, I think, of Colorado Springers, Coloradans, Americans, with some of the violence that's happened, and I just want to publicly be able to acknowledge that that's obviously in all of our thoughts. But to transition into what this talk is today, I wonder if you can help us as artists think about what it means to create art in these times that are so hard. I teach students all day long, and I know there's a lot of confusion. We're on a set of a play, celebrating an art, and then not 2 miles away, some horrible tragedy happened. Could you talk a little bit about that and the role of art in our society right now?
Sure, and I think you could probably get, 150 different interpretations, at least in my family, and I think for many people, art is a way of, it helps you connect and when you're grieving. It helps you experience emotions sometimes that are hard to get to. It's funny, I grew up, my mother's first husband, she had 2 kids and he died at the end of World War II. Then she met my dad and had 2 more kids. I was the baby. But then he got cancer and passed away when I just turned 8. And she told me one time that we had an obligation to be happy, to find joy, and whether that was in sports or theater or wherever, you had to kind of grab that. But she also said you have to make sure you don't get anesthetized. You don't become numb from going through something that's so sad. When you're around so many sad people, I think what we're experiencing these last weeks in Colorado and over the last several years, you are often around sadness. And the arts allow us to experience that sadness in a different way and process it and actually weep in ways sometimes we are numb to letting ourselves really go. And at least in my experience, being able to really connect with your own grief, which is sometimes very, very hard. When I hear some of Tom Clements, who was our head of corrections, who was shot on his front doorstep a couple years ago, and I could not get sad. I was just so stunned and I felt like I was a stone in some way. And I actually went to a musical concert, and there was one ballad that was just incredibly sad, and I just started weeping. And then for the next few days, and now I'm just about to start to cry. But I got very sad, but I felt so much better being able to process that. And I think that's part of what the arts allow us to get into what makes us human.
Well, I'm so happy to hear that. As you know, we're opening a show here tonight. It's preview night, and we've been talking a lot about, in this climate, coming and seeing a comedy. How does it feel? And I think
that's more important than ever.
Exactly. Yeah. As you know, this year marks the 50th anniversary of UCCS, which you're celebrating later this evening, but it's also the 40th anniversary of TheaterWorks that Murray and Betty started. And I wonder if this is one of the premier theater companies in the state. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about, in your tenure as governor and mayor, some of the improvements that you've seen in theater, but broadly in the arts in the state of Colorado.
I think Colorado in the last 20 years, and we've had this company, Creed, we were talking about the Creed Repertory Theater a little while, we've had exemplars for decades in Colorado. But in the last 20 years, and it's not just theater, it's music. I mean, there are more live music venues in Denver now than there are in Nashville or Austin, Texas. Right? Who knew, right? And if you look at the top performing bands of all different styles of music, there's a significant number that are living somewhere in Colorado and traveling the world performing, but this is where they're proud to call home. I think theater is the same thing. There are I can't even tell you how many theaters or live theater halls there are in along the Front Range, but from Greeley and Fort Collins all the way down to Pueblo, we are a very rich, very, very rich environment. And the DCPA, the Denver Center for the Performing Arts in Denver, is in terms of tickets sold last year, was the #1 most visited theater company outside of the professional, Broadway, the professional. But of all the nonprofits, it had the highest attendance, has second to Lincoln Center, the second largest number of seats. I mean, that's in Colorado, where Denver's the 20th largest metropolitan area. Colorado's I don't know what we are, the 30th largest state in terms of population. We're punching way beyond our weight.
So to what do you attribute that? I should embarrass you by saying you won the National Award for States Arts Leadership in 2015. You're obviously a major supporter of the arts. What are some of the initiatives and the things that your administration has done that you're very proud of to help do those things that you just said?
We have worked, we're the only state where we took creative industries and we put it into our Office of Economic Development. And I think was intended to be, and I think it was a powerful statement, that it's not just about helping you experience your deeper emotions and, evolve as a person, but it is also having a strong cultural scene as a big economic generator, and especially it attracts what Richard Florida called the creative class. So especially the young millennials who write code for the internet, or they structure complex transactions. These are people that make their living through their intellectual capacity. And generally, when they were in high school, they weren't the football stars. They generally weren't the cheerleaders. They kind of were on the periphery, and they hung out with painters and writers and performing artists of one sort or another. And they're attracted to places that have a really strong cultural vitality. So we have tried to create, through the creative enterprises of the state, we now have housing programs. We're going to have 5 different communities where we will subsidize low-income housing for artists, specifically set aside for artists. When I was mayor of Denver, we worked on trying to freeze the property taxes if a restaurant or a tavern had 4 nights or more of live music. The property taxes wouldn't go up. Property taxes don't go up very much anyway, so it wasn't much of a gift. We still couldn't keep it through. The city council got involved, but it was, again, trying to set a statement. We have a thing that we're trying to do, expand and make it more of a statewide endeavor, but we call it the Biennial of the Americas. And so often, the United States has looked east and west, or especially to the east, to Europe for our cultural touch points, and to Asia now for our economic future, and really look north to Canada, south to Mexico and South America. There is so much going on that we should be paying attention to there. There are, I think, our natural neighbors that we really don't pay enough attention to. So culture is a great way to begin to build those relationships. So the Biennial de las Americas, as we call it, the Biennial of the Americas, brings together artists and creative talent and thought leaders and academic professors, all manner of people, along with, corporate executives and business leaders as well. And we do a 4-day, it's like a mini Davos, but, really take on world challenges and issues around, large regional challenge like affordable housing or mental health or education, but approach them from a more creative, from a kind of an artistic, cultural place. So that's grown now. We do it every 2 years, and we did one this last summer. It was a huge success. It's getting bigger and bigger, and I think we're going to try and expand and have some of the events down in Colorado Springs and maybe Fort Collins and maybe Grand Junction.
Could you talk a little bit more? You just mentioned about these creative districts and how that works. One of the things I know some of my colleagues and I talk about in the Western United States with great sprawl, the idea of consolidating around a downtown that's vibrant in the arts is actually kind of tough. What are the strategies to develop these creative districts, and what are the examples of where they're working?
So I think basically creative districts are attracted to affordable space. housing, performance space, gallery space. And there's almost an evolution when there's an abandoned warehouse project. The galleries go in first, and then shortly after the galleries, you'll begin to get a performing arts venue. And then once things get going, and all of a sudden, everybody else wants to go there and put their offices or their restaurants there, the artists get priced out and they end up going to the next place. And that's about a 20 or 30-year cycle in most places where it's successful. And so we tried very aggressively, in various parts around the state, to provide loans at very low interest to galleries and performing art venues that want to own their own space so they don't get forced out, and you can keep that character. Lodo, in where I opened the Wine Coop Brewing Company, back when the rent was $1 per square foot per year, just as a frame of reference, down at 2 blocks from Coors Field now. But that, why did I ever leave business? But that was for a while an intensely creative district, whereas now, there's still a few galleries there, but maybe 1 or 2 theaters. But most of that has gone to either South Santa Fe, up into Northwest Denver. They've gone to, again, less expensive places. I think there's a huge community benefit for local government and state government. That's what we're trying to get local dollars, and we will try and find ways to match them, to create more outdoor venues, to create more places for cultural events to take place. And I think Colorado Springs is just waiting to happen, right? It is so similar to kind of what Lodo was. It does appear to be spread out. It's got lots of suburbs in the metropolitan area that, a lot of them were built for cost, as much space as possible at the lowest possible cost. But the bones of the downtown and the close into downtown, I think is so beautiful. And there are several, I can honestly say I've gone and walked around trying to say, if we were going to have an outdoor music venue in Colorado Springs, how close could we get it to downtown? Where would it be? Is it in that little park kind of behind the Antlers? What's that park called? I can't remember the name, but right where the station is there? Because there's no housing right back there. And you'd have to talk to the Antlers people and make sure the sound was oriented away, and you'd have to stop the music regardless by 10 o'clock or something. But something close in attracts young people. Again, so much of what the success that Boulder and Denver and Fort Collins have seen is their ability to attract these young millennials who are just coming in droves. And we haven't seen that as much in Colorado Springs. And we are trying to spend as much time as possible to think of how does that happen. And part of it is bike trails, part of it is open space. But if you look at what they really care about, they want to be in the mountains, they want to be close to the mountains. Colorado Springs is perfect. It's already there, so figuring out some more places for live music, some more places to congregate, some of those things. Again, I think everyone said when we had this vision in Lodo, we opened the restaurant in '88, we did lofts in 1990 because we didn't want to be a nightclub area. We wanted to be a place where people lived and walked to work. We wanted to be called it an extended village. Not sure what that meant. But we thought, well, if people walk to work, then you don't have traffic and all the reasons that people hate economic growth, a walkable community. So everyone told us we were crazy. And we sold the first loft above Wine Coop. We sold those lofts for $60 a square foot. I was a developer. We did them just to cost, 60 to 60. Those are now selling for like $600 a square foot. So once it happens, when it really works, it becomes a powerful magnet and people want to be there. And I'm not sure what the magic is going to be in Colorado Springs, but I think it's just waiting to happen.
Well, I hope it's waiting to happen. What advice to local arts leaders, to local developers would you give so that we can, obviously having the state government help us get there is important, but what is our community to do to help create these districts? Well,
and you've got to obviously look at public safety. No one's going to go. One of the great things about Lodo was that it looked scary. There were a bunch of empty warehouses, and no one wanted to go put a restaurant there. That's why the rent was $1 a square foot. The market's not stupid. But we went and did the checks, and it was a relatively safe place. And there weren't a lot of housing projects that generated crime or, muggings it was really one of the safest areas in the city. And so we worked with the city as we grew to make sure it stayed safe, because that matters. And I think, Mayor Suthers understands that intrinsically. Then you want to wrap that around and try and get developers working with creative people. It's all about quality of life, and quality of life from the perspective of a young person, and not us old people. I can't believe I'm saying that about myself. I look in the mirror and I say, I still feel young.
Well, I want to ask you, I want to sort of turn towards theater and some of your experiences. The governor was just telling me downstairs that you recently were in New York and saw Hamilton, which was obviously a terrific experience. Can you just say a little bit about that? And then I'm going to ask you some questions.
Well, I'll just say that Hamilton, and I was bragging down there because I went to a little college in Connecticut called Wesleyan. And there are a couple people here. Dick Noyes had gone to Wesleyan, so he was my great ally here. But the Lin Miranda, who wrote all the music and wrote the play and is the star of it, also went to Wesleyan, as did the director, Tommy Kail. So I'd heard about it and had heard how cool it was. But when I sat down and they told me, don't go out and buy the soundtrack, don't listen to it. When you're wait until you're in the play, which now it's almost impossible because you hear the music everywhere. But we went in there and it reminded me, an old friend of my mother's said, and they had gone to see, what's that? When you're a jet, you're on top of the world. Old is what it is. They were, when West Side Story first opened, it was the same kind of response. No one had ever done a play like that where they depicted the gangs and violence, and the music was much more edgy. And closer to more like rock and roll than traditional Broadway musicals. This is so different than anything I've ever seen or ever heard in my life. And it's a new level. I mean, it's completely factually based on the life of Alexander Hamilton and all the founding fathers. And I took AP American History and got a 4. That means I should know something, but I didn't know that Alexander Hamilton was an orphan, illegitimate child of a prostitute born in St. Croix, and basically through his own brains and his own drive worked his way up. And when you look at all the founding fathers, they were all aristocrats. They all came from good families. They were well educated. They came from generally wealthy backgrounds, and he was the one upstart who really was fighting for a centralized government, a banking system. And I'd never heard, according to the play, well, I won't tell you that because it would give it away, but the music, my 13-and-a-half-year-old son, who hasn't seen it, and he refused not to hear it because we were so excited about it. So we didn't have the soundtrack, and we listened to it almost every night, at least some parts of it, just because it's hip hop, it's rhyming, it's like rap, and I've never been able to get into rap before, and this is like almost a vertical slide into rap. You just find yourself humming it and talking. I now want to do some part of rhyming rap in my State of the State speech. We'll see.
If you want to do a dress rehearsal of that, I'm sure we could provide a stage for it. You mentioned a little bit about your upbringing. Can you talk a bit more about the importance of art in your upbringing and some early memories of some of the great art that you saw? And as an add-on to that question, when Governor Hickenlooper has a free night, which I'm sure is not all that often, what's the sort of art that you like to go see?
Sure.
And it doesn't have to be theater. It's okay if it's not.
So I grew up, my mother widowed twice, loved Broadway musicals. And so if we ever had a chance, we'd go and visit friends of hers, the Stewarts, who lived on the Upper West Side of New York, and then we'd go to a play. And her friend, who they'd gone to college together, worked for Life magazine and I think she was the editor of the entertainment section of Life. And so she got great tickets, and we got to see all kinds of these and my mom knew every word, all these plays. So I always was kind of attracted to the plays, and I was kind of a ham, but I was too shy, right? I was an extrovert who had no self-confidence and was actually, when I told my brother, and I was 50 years old, so I'm dating myself in 2003, and I said I was going to run for mayor of Denver, and I'd never run for student council or anything. And my brother said, "Oh, you got to be kidding. Politics is just Hollywood for ugly people." Right? So, well, but there is a certain truth to that in the sense that,
Come on, give yourself more credit.
well, but it comes back to, so when I opened the Wine Coop Brewing Company in 1988, I'd never worked in a restaurant before, and we had this great idea that my mother wouldn't invest. She says, who was going to want to have dinner in a brewery? I said, no, Mom, it's like a bakery. It's fresh. It's better. It's all one gestalt. She wouldn't invest. But it only took me a couple of months to figure out that when you're the boss in a restaurant and you walk in and you're in a bad mood, you had a fight with your girlfriend or your boyfriend, whatever, you're in a bad mood, within about 2 hours, if you're not paying attention, all of a sudden the bartenders are bickering and they're in a bad mood, and the expediters putting the plates on the tray are cranky, and the servers, and you really, literally within about 3 months, I'd stop when I got to the front door and I'd kind of look in the glass and I'd imagine, remember that Bob Fosse movie, it's Showtime. What was it called? Chorus Line.
Chorus line. Was that what we're talking about? No. All that
jazz. Oh, whatever.
Hey, I didn't know either, so it's...
You should have just gone along with Chorus Line. It would have felt so much better. But it was all that jazz. So it's Showtime. I would do that every time I went into the restaurant because I would have to be, and it's funny, you pretend to be happy, and sometimes you're putting a big smile on your face, and you're going through these motions, but as you pretend it, you become it. And it's funny, it turned out my dad, we never knew this, but my dad had gone and spent 2 years in the same fraternity house as Kurt Vonnegut, the writer. And they'd become great friends, and we never knew that. Kurt Vonnegut no one had ever heard of Kurt Vonnegut until he was 50 years old, and he wrote the Slaughterhouse-Five, when it was 1970. And he told me one time, he said, you have to be very careful of who you pretend to be because that's who you're going to become, which is a really interesting thing in terms of theater and whether politics is theater, because you really do, you have to, when someone says something and is trying to attack you and they're trying to hurt you, you can't let them see that it hurts. You just got to figure out how to smile, and your mind is spinning and trying to figure out a way to put a positive spin and come back in such a way that you demonstrate that you're not demoralized, you're not diminished, because otherwise they'll do it again.
Well, this is a terrific segue. You're good. This is a terrific segue into where the set, where there's the Capitol behind us, and that we're doing Born Yesterday, starting previews tonight. And Born Yesterday is about a lot of things, but certainly it's about this sort of early idealism of politics. And in this culture of, I'm assuming you're not going to comment on Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton and those folks.
Sure.
Okay, great. But in this culture where a reality star is a front runner, Hillary Clinton is certainly a superstar, a celebrity. Do you think that there is a cynicism? I mean, I think there is. Do you see a cynicism that people see towards politics because it has become so entertainmentized?
Yeah, and I'll say two things. One, in terms of Donald Trump, because I can't resist.
Yeah, please do.
I remember the first People magazine that ever came out. I'm that old. And I remember my mother picking it up. And I bought one in the little local drugstore. I brought it home, and she's paging and looking at it. And she looks at me and she goes, "This is a bad idea whose time has come." And that is Donald Trump is a bad idea whose time has come. I think,
of course, People magazine is still definitely around. So
sure is. Its time is still here. I think I had a writing teacher at Wesleyan, and part of my connection with the arts is I tried to be an artist because I had really thick glasses and acne, and I didn't think I'd ever get a girlfriend if I didn't have some way of being hip. Unfortunately, I wasn't a very good musician. I was too nervous, too unsure of myself to act. Everything I tried I wasn't a good writer. I was a horrible writer, but I took all the classes, and I can play like 3 songs on the piano pretty well, but everyone thinks, oh, you're a really good piano player. No, I've just practiced these 3 songs 80,000 times. But this writing teacher, a guy named Frank Reeve, who was actually the father of Christopher Reeve, the late actor who played Superman. But Frank Reeve had one time, he had a guy named Paul Horgan came in. Paul Horgan was a wonderful writer, nonfiction writer. And he said, let me get it right. He said, everything has been said, but not everything has been said superbly. And even if it had, everything must be said freshly again and again. right? So everything has been said, but it hasn't been said superbly, okay? And even if it had been said superbly, it's got to be said freshly. And I think that's part of the challenge here with politics, is that we've heard it all. We're done with it. We're numb, and it's up to people like myself to find fresh ways to talk about the issues about mental health and the connection to guns, about the vitriol and some of the hyperbole that's used in these against Planned Parenthood or against all kinds of it. It doesn't matter whether it's, and trust me, the left does it as much as the right. This excessive inflammatory rhetoric, which really does get people so upset. For most people, it's not a big problem, but we're at a point now where obviously some people, they hit a tipping point and they begin to lose connection with reality, and whatever empathy they have for other human beings goes out the window. And I think we've got to kind of recognize, I'm not saying we're not in any way suggesting we limit free speech or pass any laws, but as a community, we should begin discussing how to tone it down a little. We can still have the debate without trying to inflame the other side.
Since you briefly touched on it, with all politics being at least a little bit theatrical or a lot theatrical, can you think of times in your career, coming up through the ranks, becoming the governor of Colorado, that you've stopped and said, "Wait a minute, I'm being an actor right now. I'm not being John Hickenlooper." And how do you bring yourself back from that? Or maybe that's never happened. I don't know.
No, absolutely, it's happened, and you say things sometimes you wish you hadn't said, and you wish you could swallow those words back, and take them out of the air, and yet it's out there. And I think it is one of the reasons why people criticize Hillary Clinton for being so cautious and careful with how she phrases things. It's because over so many years, on so many occasions, she said something a little casually with the best of intentions and had the wording used to really change her meaning in a very negative way that she was embarrassed about. Or even worse, I'm sure it's happened to her, I know it's happened to me, where you have, you've lost control a little bit. Someone's gotten under your skin, and you say something that's kind of thoughtless and maybe cruel, or comes out sounding sexist in some way or something, whatever. And I think that the only real solution to that, because we're all human, is to try to slow down a little bit. And for those of us that grew up with the thick Coke bottle glasses and the heavy acne, and we're always trying to appear clever and witty and quick, it's a difficult lesson to learn.
I have just a couple more questions, and I know you're on a tight schedule, but I'm remiss not to talk a little bit about education and arts education, which I know you're a big supporter of. One of the things that I'm the director of the theater and dance program, and one of my jobs is to advise students, and that often means advising distraught parents who realize their child has decided to be a theater major. And
do you have a psychology major?
Yeah.
Counseling?
Exactly. I was thinking, to name names, no. Politicians, all of them have done this. I don't assume you have. Marco Rubio railed against the other day. Philosophers, some fellow governors, Rick Scott, Rick Perry, said that we should be definitely focusing on STEM, not liberal arts. Even the president said something to that degree about a year ago. This is in some ways a very personal question, because I'd like you to give me something to say to those distraught parents and to say to those students. And I can say, well, Governor Hickenlooper said.
Well, I'm not running for re-election, so I'm term limited out. That's no problem. I can give you some ammo. And I think I'm not sure, but I think I'm the only governor. I know I'm the only governor who was a professional geologist in history of the country. I'm the first governor who's a brewer since 1792 in Sam Adams. And I think I'm the first governor in an awfully long time who's a member of the Screen Actors Guild. So I am a card-carrying member of SAG because my cousin George Hickenlooper, who passed away when I got literally 4 days before I got elected in 2010, was a documentarian. He made, if you ever saw Hearts of Darkness, the documentary made on Francis Ford Coppola's making of Apocalypse Now, that was directed by George Hickenlooper. And he did, his last movie was with Kevin Spacey and Kelly Preston and John Lovitz, was called Casino Jack. It's a story of Jack Abramoff. So and he thought that I was good luck. So he would always put me into these scenes with little cameos. And in Casino Jack, I play Senator Cunningham, who Kevin Spacey has this meltdown going around. He's talking to a select Senate panel. He's storming around going, "You people should stand for something. You guys are crap. You don't have," it just goes on. It's really, I watched him do this on the set. It's about a 4-minute rant that he did in one take. And everybody went back to the cameras and they had these little video things and they shot it back. And all the crew and all the extras, maybe 100 people, all applauded. Just when they saw, the lighting guy was like 70 years old, famous lighting director. He said he'd never seen it. But Kevin Spacey was breathtaking. At the end of that, I had to interrupt him and stand up and say, "Remove that man!"
Very good.
And so Kevin Spacey did one take for this incredible monologue, and my cousin George made me do 28 takes. So now I will answer the question, and I think that.
And I thought Governor Schwarzenegger was the only movie star governor, but it turns out there are a couple.
That's true. Well, there's 2 of us, I guess.
I'm sorry? Oh, Reagan.
Ronald Reagan, of course. Oh my gosh.
We had 3.
But I bet he never. Do you think he ever joined the Union? He was. Oh, sorry. So I would argue that one of the big, and we do need more people in STEM, right? We need more kids. One of our biggest challenges right now is I think, in my opinion, we're an affluent culture, and we don't push our kids hard enough. They don't have enough discipline in their lives to put in the time and the work to have the choices, so when they get old enough, they can decide whether they want to be a scientist or an artist or a banker or whatever. And I think I can tell you again and again, the people that take strong liberal arts background and really put themselves into it have all kinds of choices. There's a guy in Denver, he's the CEO of a company called Liberty Media. It's like it's a media company it's like Berkshire Hathaway. They control about $45 billion worth of companies. Big company. He gets paid, I don't know, $40 million a year plus stock options. And he's, I don't know, in his early 50s. And he was a religious studies major at Dartmouth. But he threw himself into it. He understood the structure and the symmetry, the intellectual purpose, and has used that framework and that analytical capacity to become a business executive. He probably could have just as well gone off and been an actor and had that same organization. Study after study shows that music directly connects to your capacity with mathematics. They're just solely, yeah. As a mathematician or a musician, one or the other, or both. But the overlap is again and again one of my goals, and we'll see if I can figure out how to fund it. But I would love Colorado to be the first state in America where every single kid who wants to play a musical instrument gets one, right? And we're not. I don't think it's a huge amount of money. It's for a state government. It's a couple $1 million a year, and I think we have to figure this out. But we have a bunch of musicians who I think would do big benefit concerts. There's a band that lives in Denver called One Republic that has had a bunch of big hits, and Nathaniel Rateliff, who's got that new song called SOB. These guys have got big mega hits. They're turning out to become serious millionaires. I think we could convince them to take a night off once a year. If we're something like that our goal is to make sure every kid not only gets an instrument, but gets, there's some new training programs where you don't start giving them the classical, here's how you read music. But you start out with chords and you let the kid learn how to make music, songs, in the second week. So they really begin to get positive feedback and they again, they're able to show that kids are much more likely to really adapt to it. But that kind of stuff, I think, if you have a state full of kids doing music, I guarantee you're going to have a state full of super smart, religious studies majors, but also a bunch of very talented advertising executives and corporate executives. I mean, and a bunch of great computer programmers, and a lot of the biggest successes in science and computing is that creative spark, right? We're not the best country for how well people do on engineering exams, right? We are the best country for taking that knowledge and translating it into new ideas, right? And I think we want to foster that every way we can. And liberal arts, and especially creative arts, performing arts, is one of the very best ways you can do that.
That's great. Thank you for saying that. And of course,
you tell them I said that.
I was going to say, can I paraphrase and say Governor Hickenlooper says just stop worrying about it? Okay, to wrap up, and you're going down that road here with your last answer a little bit. Could you talk about, as you look back and also look forward in your political career, what are the things that we still need to work on? Getting instruments to students obviously is a great thing, but what are the concerns that you have that we should be working on as far as culture and arts, both in the state but nationally?
So I think on a broader arc, the recognition that funding culture is more than just funding individuals discovering themselves, or more than appealing to certain limited audiences. It's about creating a community and a culture that celebrates creativity, and therefore is going to have, you're going to accelerate inventions. Right now, Colorado Springs, Denver, Fort Collins, Grand Junction, everyone's looking at how many startups do you have, and how do we get more young people to start businesses and go out there and take the risk and create something new, basically translate ideas into jobs, inventions, intellectual property, translate those innovations into jobs. And people that have been connected to the creative arts, they understand something about risk, right? They understand what you can risk and what you shouldn't risk. They understand about putting yourself out there and being willing to fail. Oh my gosh, you go out and hear the stories in Silicon Valley. That is a drumbeat. And I think if we didn't have, again, California for many, many, many years was the leader in the country in terms of state funding for the creative arts. I mean, they had music and art everywhere. They backed off on that, right? Over the last 20 or 25 years, they've had the same fiscal cautionary, I call them the buffaloes, but the folks that really want to go back to the old ways. And so they've had to cut back on a lot of that funding. But it's not just a coincidence that so much wealth and so much business happens in those places with large universities, right? Because large universities generally have a lot of culture, almost always. And Boston, New York, Washington, D.C. now, San Francisco, Los Angeles, they all have tons of universities. And I think the offshoot of that is this, this creative class of people that want to be there and create things. So my goal in terms of what we do is to find things that are discrete, measurable goals that we can lay out. Like every kid who wants one gets an instrument. And we're in the process of assessing that right now. There's a woman in Fort Collins, Greeley, who I think is going to take that on in their whole region up there, and we'll see what it costs and do several school districts. And based on that, then we'll come back down and start looking for sponsors and ways to do it in the rest of the state. But there got to be several places where we can inspire not just us, but our neighbors and our voters, our taxpayers, to say this is meaningful to our future economic vitality in a very powerful way, that our culture has to have creativity and celebrate it and see demonstrations of it frequently.
Governor, I want to thank you. We have to get you to your next event, but you've been such a wonderful supporter of the arts, and we've been so excited to have you come for a prologue lecture. I know it's been said, but I'm going to say it one more time, and I don't mean to embarrass you.
You're going to say it freshly.
I'm going to say it freshly, exactly. This wouldn't have happened without Sally Hibble, who's helped enormously in working with the governor's office. It means so much to us. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure and delight.